This is Tanner Schuermann, who is the Conservation Director at Greene County. He grew up in Jefferson, and he lives near Rippey, as he was explaining to me. He is a very good sport, because we planned this program with Dan Powers, and he was on the schedule, and then COVID came along, and so we couldn't give the program. So then we pushed it back to the next year, and Dan Powers was supposed to give it, and again we had COVID, and he couldn't give it. So Tanner has graciously agreed to give it, and we appreciate it very much. I'm sorry that Joe Allen, who is the park ranger at Spring Lake, can't be here, but as Tanner explained, a tree came down in the campground, and he's doing that today. So, Tanner?
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Turn that down. I don't know. Is it back here? Can everybody hear me? Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Margaret. Thank you, everybody, for having me. Again, my name's Tanner Schuermann. Native of Greene County. Grew up just outside of Jefferson, or just on the south end of Jefferson. But actually lived in Grand Junction until I was about 5, and moved away after high school, and slowly made my way back, and it's really glad to be back in Greene County. So. Today I'm going to present a little bit about Spring Lake Park. It's gone from a resort to a state park and now a county park, so there's a lot of history I'm sure you can all understand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about the lake today, start a little bit about the history going back to the 1800s right up and through now, and then a little bit about the future, kind of some of the things that we have in store down the road here. Afterwards, I'd really like to hear from some of you. I got a lot of my information. I've done a lot of research on Spring Lake, and it's kind of funny when you start digging, and you're looking at old newspaper clippings, old board minutes, first-hand accounts from people, that you get a lot of variation in the dates of things. So if you guys have any clarification on any of the dates or anything that I have given in here, that'd be great. And then, like I said, I'd love to hear stories. I'm going to share a few stories that people have told me, over the years when I was younger, and then since I've been back in the area too, just over a year. So I'll go ahead and get started here. So again, my name's Tanner Schuermann. Thank you for having me. So a lot of you probably realize that, what we see here in Iowa today isn't what it looked like, 150, 200 years ago. Pre-settlement, a lot of Greene County, and especially the Spring Lake area, looked a lot like this. This is in Iowa, but it's not in Greene County. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of these areas anymore, so that's something, conservation boards and Department of Natural Resources is trying to increase across the state. But going back to the history, when settlers first came here, of course, like I said, they found a lot of swampy, marshy ground. Travel was obviously difficult by horseback or stagecoach, so they needed a route to get from east to west across Iowa. So in 1855, the land was actually purchased from the United States by some local ag producers. Things changed hands for about 40, 50 years. I think a lot of the ag producers realized that this wasn't very easy ground to farm. So they were, just kind of changing hands. I think people were trying things and it wasn't working. So over that time, in 1866, Northwestern Railroad needed gravel to build their route from Clinton to Missouri Valley, east to west across Iowa. So, they searched and searched, and just south of the current line there, the east-west line, or just north, sorry, a few miles, at the confluence of East and West Butcher Creek, they found a vein of gravel, and it was a big vein of gravel. So they created a spur, a railroad track that went from the current tracks that we know today up to, similar to what we know today, up to Spring Lake, and started pulling gravel out of Spring Lake, what we know as Spring Lake today. Gravel was excavated just until after 1901. Just after that, they added an additional, right around that time, they were adding an additional track. So just after that time, Spring Lake was not necessarily abandoned, but they were no longer taking gravel out of there, so they had a couple other uses for Spring Lake. Back in 1908, Northwestern Railroad began harvesting the ice out of Spring Lake to use on their passenger trains east and west across Iowa. So what they did was, in the wintertime, obviously, they went out and they cut big chunks in the ice. The picture on your left is not Spring Lake, but that's kind of a similar operation of what they would have been doing back then. The one on the right is Spring Lake. This is a car that was being packed for ice to use along that route. They said back then the ice was around 15 to 18 inches thick, so you can imagine how big those chunks of ice were. So what they did, these people, they were hauling ice, cutting ice night and day. They said, I read a story, and this was a first-hand account that I read, that workers were actually out there day and night working with lanterns, cutting ice and loading these trains up because it was such a popular route that people were taking that they needed to keep things cool and, keep people happy. So what they did was in the wintertime, they would store all of this ice in a big ice house, and that was actually located on the very south end of the lake, southwest kind of end of the lake. I couldn't find any remnants of it, of course, it's been a long time, but I'm sure there's probably still some there. But also, along with the main ice house, there were various vendors that kept smaller ice houses out there along the lake as well. And kind of going back to one of those first-hand accounts, I guess this isn't really first-hand, but one of those smaller ice houses actually ended up at my house when I was a young boy, and we used it as a chicken coop. I think my dad ended up buying it from I talked to Dan Towers, and he thought maybe a farmer had ended up with it, and then my dad ended up with it. So we used that for a chicken coop for quite a while. Kind of neat to look back after learning this, and we had one of them. So really neat. So yeah, that continued for quite some time there at Spring Lake. Until about 1824, there was a lot of interest. There was actually a newspaper article that was written, I believe, in Junction. There was a man that actually predicted that Spring Lake would become what it is today and what it became in the 20s. Back during that time, early 1900s, 1910, even though the gravel operation had stopped and they were doing ice, a lot of people still recreated Spring Lake, especially during the summertime. So in 1924, the 240-acre parcel was actually purchased by a group from Boone. And it was a few groups of investors. One of them was actually the former mayor of Boone. And they purchased this property in thoughts to turn it into a resort that, I can't remember the exact words, a resort that would match any in the world. And they did that for some time. I wish we had more pictures and obviously more first-hand accounts of that time, because it sounds like Spring Lake was a pretty happening place during the 20s. So the investors they bought the property, and at that point it wasn't really called Spring Lake, or at least I don't think it was. I think these investors had come up with that name, and that's where the name came from. Obviously, that's because of when they were pulling gravel out, they found a few different springs within the area that actually brought water into the pits. So that's where the name Spring Lake came from. So shortly after them purchasing the land, they went to work. They started creating areas for people to picnic. They created a baseball diamond as well as an amphitheater. A lot of you remember, and I remember this when I was a kid, I remember the ball diamond kind of being to the north of the current lakeside shelter. The original ball diamond was actually on the east side, where the east side shelter currently is now, and there's an amphitheater there, and the Rippy team, the Rippy Regents, actually used to play regularly out there, along with a lot of the other teams that were local within the county and then also outside of the county. So grab this picture, it's pretty neat. Kind of looking through some of the names, you still see some familiar names on there, some people that are still in the county, so it's kind of neat to see a lot of those people stuck around and continue to live here in Green County. Back to the 20s. Spring Lake welcomes the roaring 20s, and boy did they ever. So up here at the top left, that was the original ticket booth. When you pulled into the park, it was 10 cents a day to be able to enter the park per day. A couple other first-hand accounts I read about, people actually used to sneak people in the trunks of their cars, so they didn't have to pay the 10 cents a day. Because they didn't pay by car, it was by person. And then when they were done with the day, they'd sneak out the backside. So kind of neat to hear that. So the ticket booth there, that's actually where our office is now for the Conservation Board. And I'll get a little bit into that later, but you kind of see that little building right there in the center. For those of you that have been out there recently, you kind of see we've been doing a little work to that area. So, oh, excuse me, sorry. Sorry about that. Move this down a little bit. So during that time, like I said, they constructed a bathhouse near where the current beach is. There was actually another beach up by where the lakeside shelter is now, and where the dance hall formerly was as well. They also built the beach of a small bathhouse, refreshment stands, and community kitchen. Apparently this community kitchen was a really big deal. There were a lot of people that came out there, various groups to use the community kitchen. Pretty neat deal that we don't really have a lot of today. Another shelter was built, I believe that was in actually late 20s or early 30s, and that's one of our still standing structures. If you all know, when you go out to the lake and you go across the pedestrian bridge to the east and up the hill, there's that shelter that stands there. The fireplace is gone. I've actually got a picture of it right here. And I've got a few pictures here if you folks want to look at those when we're done here. That's that shelter there. So they're trying to get people there. They're trying to build facilities to get people in there so they could recreate and swim, fish, boat, do whatever they did back in the 20s. So you can kind of see here on the bottom, there's some of the pictures of the beach. So the beach was also, it was basically a little amusement park. They had a giant water slide. You can kind of see the diving tower a little bit in that bottom left picture. And then they also had a 100-foot water toboggan. Apparently there was a tower that was located somewhere near the beach, and they had a little kind of wooden structure that they used that had wheels on it, and when it hit the water, it would skim across the water. So what would happen is the brave souls that would do it, they'd go down that thing, go out into the lake, and they'd have to swim that thing back, and they'd get it pushed back up for the next person. Bring the raft, yep. So apparently, I don't think that lasted too long, because I think there were a lot of injuries, which is to be understood with something like that. But that was another one of those deals that I don't think a lot of people really knew about. So moving on here, the dance hall is no longer currently there. Where the dance hall sits now is our lakeside shelter, right there kind of on the north end of the lake. It was actually completed in 1925, and the dances took place there on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturday evenings. They did take place during other times. They actually, I read something about, they had a couple moonlight, I don't know if they were moonlight dances, but the dances would actually begin at 11 p.m. They would dance all night, so kind of a neat deal. The bandstand gazebo, which was located just south of the dance hall, it was actually out in the water. I had no idea that this even existed until I started doing my research. And it's a pretty neat type of deal, and again, I'll share some first-hand accounts. Again, I don't know if there's a lot of truth to these, but it's kind of neat to hear this stuff.
First played in that little gazebo, but you had to go through the dance hall to get out there because there was a track out there unless you wanted to swim.
Unless you wanted to swim, okay. And it was just a narrow boardwalk that walked out there. Okay. So so that was, like I said, that was probably 30, 40 yards out into the lake. From what I understand, that people played in the dance hall and they also played in the band show, correct? And some of the bigger acts, I guess, would probably play in the dance hall, and then some of the smaller acts that said, we had a lot of local bands and music that would come. They played in the gazebo, yep. So really neat to hear about that. Another thing I learned, which I had no idea, the dance hall and bandstand, like I was saying, a lot of local acts, but they also brought in a lot of national acts, including Gavin Barlow and Lawrence Welk, and I guess I'm relatively young, but I still remember these people when I remember the Lawrence Welk show, so it's really good to hear that, Spring Lake was that popular that we were getting those acts into the county, so really neat to learn that as well. So also back in the 20s, late 20s, which they consider the golden age of roller skating, which I did a little research on that and found a lot of great information because I used to be a roller skater myself. I don't do it a lot anymore, but when I was a kid, I did. Back in 1929, Sweet Carlson and his wife Maud, they began to plan building a skating rink out there, and they had Hard Martin from Jefferson build the building for them. The first music within the skating rink was provided by a calliope. Well, like I said, I was doing my research, and back in the 20s and early 30s, a lot of these places nationwide, skating rinks nationwide, were starting to bring in these organs. So the Carlsons got the idea of, hey, maybe we should get an organ too. And they purchased a Hammond organ back in 1938, and they were actually the first rink in Iowa that had organ music played during the skating time. So pretty neat to hear about that. Down in Mylands Bush, he played the keys on the old Hammond for many years, and his wife would actually sit in when he was either way sick. Then he actually got called to fight the armed services back in '42, and his wife Winona filled in while he was away. So there's a couple pictures. There's Winona up there on the left playing the organ. Looks like that's Harry and Wyoming, Miles Bach playing there. And then this is Swede and Maud Carlson, the owners of the skating rink.
And I played after my own rules.
Who's that?
I played Marilyn Haskins and played.
I've got your history right here.
John Miley just played with no music in front of him. He just sat and
Yes.
played so beautifully, and he would watch all the skaters around him do the two-step music, and they would all be skating and rhythm.
Yes.
It was great.
I learned that he was actually a state champion too for a few different dances that he would do, maneuvers and things like that. So yeah, it was pretty neat to learn all that as well. You're going to hear me say pretty neat to learn this because I did learn a lot. And it is really neat to me. So again, 20s kind of moved on, and we got to get into the 20s, 30s, and 40s. By that time, we said Spring Lake had really become a popular place. Spring Lake 4th of July celebration was estimated to bring in about 25,000 people over that time period. I'm guessing it probably wasn't just that day, but I would guess during that, the holiday weekend or week or whatever. But can you imagine 25,000 people at Spring Lake at one time, or even over a weekend? Right now we get we consider Spring Lake about the second largest town in the county during the summertime on a busy weekend. So we figure, probably maybe 3,000 people. So I can't even imagine 25,000. That just blows me away. There's a newspaper clipping too, a man named Sam Smiley, who's an early investor with the Spring Lake Company. He recalled bringing in over $2,000 a day there in their boom days. We don't bring in $2,000 a day today. I wish we did. During the summertime, busy weekend, we'll bring in quite a bit more than that, but that's throughout the week, not one day. So it's pretty interesting to hear that they were bringing that kind of money. So. In 1929, the Farmers Union Labor Day celebration, they brought in about 4,000 people. And I understand that was a pretty common occurrence, that groups like that would come in and bring that amount of people. So I did find this. Spring Lake hold a big celebration for July 4th. I just kind of wanted to share that with you. This was from June 24th, 1926. So this is going back. The folks from the Spring Lake Company still owned the place, and they were looking for new ideas. What do we do to, improve things and, new boats and things like that. So I'll just go ahead and read it for you real quick. Spring Lake is to have a real 4th of July celebration this year. The manager in charge of Spring Lake has had a force of men busy getting ready for the celebration for the past 2 weeks. The lake front is to be decorated, and there's to be band music in the afternoon and evening of both days. In addition to the usual sport program given on the 2 afternoons, there's to be a baseball tournament between County baseball teams. The boats of the lake have all been repainted for the season, and there's been so many wonderful changes made at the lake during the past 3 months that it's necessary for a person to make a special visit in order to see what great improvements have been made. Manager Alexander, he was the former mayor of Boone. He was in charge of the lake at the time as far as the management went, and he's a firm believer in keeping good order. We're trying to make the lake a place where a man will be pleased to take his family, and I have given orders to the officers to keep perfect order at all times. And we still keep that philosophy today. As a result of this policy, everyone likes to visit the lake, and they are all bringing their children with them. So, again, you can kind of see how popular that was. I also read a few first-hand accounts about the celebration, and apparently, with that many people, all gravel roads, the dust was so bad that they actually had to wait a couple hours for people to get settled before they would blow off the fireworks because it was so dusty. So, pretty, again, interesting to hear, there's that, a lot going on out there. So, in the 40s, the onset of World War II in 1939, the resort Spring Lake began to decline, unfortunately. There's deterioration of facilities over the years, loss of funding, some of their investors pulled out, and then we also had fuel rationing, the draft, and also changing tastes of entertainment were also happening during that time, as some of you probably remember. So yeah, not that there weren't people out there, the skating rink was still operating, very popular, people still went out for that. It was just kind of on a slow, I guess, decline after a few years. So in August 1949, Chicago Northwestern Spring Lake Company had basically had enough, and they sold the 240-acre parcel to the Iowa Parks Commission, where it would become a state park. So, after it became a state park in 1949, back then, and even today, we all struggle with funding, but the state park system back then, the Conservation Commission back then, there wasn't a lot of funding for state parks. So a lot of the facilities went into decline. They did build a few things out there during that time, but nothing major. So again, not really much changed out there during the 40s and the early 50s. So shortly after the state took over, and I'd love to hear if any of you have any more information on the Greene County Conservation League. So this was before the Conservation Board was formed back in 1958 or 59. And so what happened was a lot of the residents of Greene County were fed up. You know, they loved the lake, they loved being out there, they just didn't have facilities. So what they did is, again, I'm not sure when, but the County Conservation League was formed. And back in 1954, the Conservation League launched an all-out drive, all hands on deck, to improve Greene County parks, including Spring Lake, and Spring Lake would be their top priority. So I brought these articles with me today too, and I can kind of set them on the table or something if you guys want to flip through them afterwards too, to kind of get a little more information. But yeah, that was really instrumental. Actually, these county conservation leagues, Greene County wasn't the only one. They had a lot of different names across the state, but that was really instrumental in getting the county conservation boards installed within the state as well. So thanks to those folks back then that took it out of their, took it into their own hands to try to improve things out there. So yeah, back in 54, this would actually have been in 1953. They did start dredging the lake again, a lot of siltation over, 50 years, 50 plus years of, no gravel being taken out and things like that. So they did get in there and they did a lot of dredging of the lake, cleaning up around the edges, planting trees and things like that. And it wasn't just Spring Lake, like I said, they were doing the parks all over the county at that point. So again, it's hard to talk about Spring Lake without talking about the conservation boards and the creation of Iowa's county conservation system. So again, it's hard to talk about conservation without talking about Thomas McBride. So in 1896, an early Iowa native conservationist, Thomas McBride, addressed the Iowa Academy of Science with his paper titled County Parks. So basically what this was this was something to let them know that, we have interest out there within our counties, our small local governments, to get these parks and places, looking good, because we understand there isn't a lot of funding from the state. So this was well early. This was before conservation boards were even thought of. So about 50 years later, the Iowa State Conservation Commission, that'd be the state level, they presented the first bill to the Iowa General Assembly in 1945 or 43, and this was to permit establishment of conservation and recreation agencies at a local level, county level, across the state of Iowa. So it took about 10 to 12 years to kind of fine-tune things with the bill, but in 1955 they did finally pass a bill that required each of Iowa's 99 counties to pass a referendum during their general election to establish a county conservation board within their county. So during that time, there were actually 16 counties right there in 1956 that got on board and they created their county conservation boards. We waited a couple of years. There was kind of a gap. I think there were only a couple in 57, and then 58, there were quite a few more, including Greene County. So July 29, 1958, the first Greene County Conservation Board meeting was held at the Greene County Greene County Courthouse, this is a picture of the board minutes for that day. Really neat. Got a lot of my information from the minutes, previous minutes from over the years. So I have that with me if you guys want to take a look at that afterwards too. So Guy Richardson, he was actually nominated as the first Greene County Conservation Board chairman. A lot of people didn't know that actually Dick Seaman was the first County Conservation Board chairman, temporarily for about 10 minutes until they nominated Mr. Richardson. So kind of neat, another one of those things I hope maybe some of you didn't know. So the Board of Supervisors and Conservation Board agreed on an operating budget of $500 in 1958. Sure, you can understand even in 1958, you can't get a whole lot done with a whole county of parks for $500. So they went in 1958, they did They requested $1,000 from the Board of Supervisors, and they agreed on $500 for 1958, and then in 1959 they actually gave them a good operational budget for the time of $36,000 in 1959. So when you look at today, our operating budget between our REAP account, Conservation Trust, and the general fund, we're right about $480,000 for our budget. So you can see in 50, 60 years how much that's changed and how much more we have to manage these days. So in 1960, Sam Hyde was named as Greene County's first director, my position now, and he served until just a short time until his death in 1962 when Barney Hobart took over as director. There's a picture of Barney actually affixing Sam Hyde's plaque to a stone out at Hyde Park, which was named after Mr. Hyde. With the help of the Conservation Board, Barney and his one staff member, his assistant Wayne Luke, they got to work developing Hyde Park, Oak Hill Park, Henderson Park, and Squirrel Hollow. So those were all the county's first parks. So now we've expanded quite a bit. Right around then, I think they had about 500 acres. Now we're over 2,000 and 14 plus parks, wildlife areas, and bike trails. So quite a bit has changed in that time. Within 10 years of the inception of the County Conservation Board, the board is now managing, like I said, 5 parks, 6 river accesses, and 239 acres. Sorry, I thought it was about 500, but 239 acres. So again, lots changed. We're about times 10 with our acres, and then about times 3 or 4 with our various parks and things, trails and wildlife areas. So in the 1970s, or actually it was 1969, Spring Lake State Park turned over management to the Conservation Board, which began developing the park into what we know today. So back then, again, not a lot of funding. The County Conservation Board was willing to take over the lake, again, using funding from the county, so they allowed that. I think at that time, I don't think Spring Lake was the first, but I know there were 12, at one time there were 12 state parks that were county managed across the state. And that was a couple years ago. I tried to do a little research to see what was still out there as far as county managed state parks, and I couldn't find, I guess, good enough information to share with you. But I think there's only 7 or 8, right around 7 or 8 right now. So again, that was a big shift from having little to no funds. Now we have a budget where we can do things at Spring Lake. So July 30th, 1969, Howard Carlson gifted the skating rink to the Conservation Board, ensuring the rink would remain operational for future generations to enjoy. So apparently they made a deal with the DNR, and DNR said, yep, that's fine, we'll keep the skating rink. Well, shortly after they took over, they changed their mind, and they wanted to get rid of the skating rink. Well, you can imagine what a bunch of residents of Greene County did. They got together and signed a petition, and they got 1,000 signatures in a very short amount of time, presented it to the Parks Commission, and they decided, you know what, we'll keep the skating rink, which made the skating rink at Spring Lake the first and only at the time private building or private structure in a state park. And I don't know, how many have come along after that or how many still remain. I would guess not very many, but kind of another neat deal that a lot of people didn't know. So yeah, 1969, the Carlsons gifted the skating rink to the Conservation Board, which again kept it open. We still operate it today. It's on our the National Historic Registration of Historical Places. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So yes, it is on that now. We understand that it is the second oldest still operational wooden floor skating rink in the United States. So another really great thing that we have here in the county. So yeah, the rink stayed, still operational today, still getting quite a crew out there on the weekends, and I think we will continue to do that for as long as we can. So George Geimer was actually named the first Spring Lake Park Ranger in 1970, County Conservation Park Ranger, and he served through 1974 until Dick Bowman took over from 1975 to 1979. So a couple pictures here, that's kind of talking about how many people. We had about 500 people a day at Spring Lake that first year. I think I've got that on the next slide. The gift from the Carlsons. And then that's the shower house. That's the bathhouse that was newly installed late 60s and early 70s, and that's the current building that still stands there today. And then the building over here on the other side, that is the lakeside shelter that we go today. So, move on here.
Mr. Schuermann,
Yes.
it was probably misspelled in the newspaper article, but there's no U in Geimer.
No, you and Geimer. I'll remember that. I'll write it down. Thank you.
They used to run the county home.
Say that again.
He and his wife used to run the county home.
Oh, the county. Okay. Good to know. So, again, like I had that page from the last slide, that first year of operation, Spring Lake had over 500 people visiting. They took a survey daily, and that was daily. Right now, we probably get, during the summertime, we're probably hitting that or more, but, this time of year, not as many, of course. But they had 400 camping units stay in the park that year, and they generated approximately $850 in revenue that first year. Again, to put that into perspective, today, this last fiscal year, we brought in just over, I think, $160,000 in revenue. So, big change in not necessarily popularity, but revenue, with the times. But so by the mid-70s, Spring Lake was becoming popular again. They were installing new things, getting up to date on some of their facilities. They were actually featured in the Des Moines Sunday Register, in their Iowa County Parks Treasures in 1974. And it's a really great article. I brought it with me if you guys want to flip through that afterwards. That's great too. It has a lot of great pictures, talks a lot about the history, and then kind of what's currently going on in Spring Lake. And back then, this was before we had laid out campsites along the lake. So people were just kind of camping wherever they could. They were just kind of poking back into the woods, and a lot more trees in Spring Lake back then too. So there's a lot more shade, of course. And, the neatest picture I think I found is a little sailboat right there. I don't know if any of you remember anything like that with the sailboats and things being out there, but that was really cool too. But, so yeah, with the popularity, that was the other thing I was getting at. Back in the 70s and 80s, camping really took off. I mean, popular before that, this is when it really took off. So, that really increased the need to update facilities, like I was saying. They built, back in 1970 and 71, they built 4 pit toilets, vault toilets out in Spring Lake. You may remember those. We still have 1 left that we're going to be replacing in the next year. But they also built shelters, a couple small shelters, and installed a few electrical hookups as well for campers and folks that are picnicking out there as well. So getting with the times, 1980s. So during the late 70s and early 80s, the staff began modernizing Spring Lake. They added the Park Ranger House, which currently sits there today, the East Side Shelter, where the amphitheater and the baseball diamond used to stand, and a new maintenance shop. Before the maintenance shop was installed, the maintenance shop was in the little garage that you see there, kind of off to the right when you pull in the park. That was the original shop for Spring Lake. So they added their first maintenance one just to the west of there. The maintenance shop just to the west of there. They set up in the 80s, and then I believe in the 90s we had our current one that we use now. So the Conservation Board began a partnership back then with the Iowa DNR to raise fish, so that we could have a great fish population at Spring Lake. So I think it was 1978 when they kicked this off. They kicked off the fish baskets at Spring Lake. They had a stocking program for nearly, I think, 4 decades. They did this, and I think it was back, and again, Dan didn't really remember exactly when it was, but thought it was somewhere probably very late 90s or early 2000s when the DNR decided to kind of give up doing this. They were doing it at a lot of lakes across the state, but they decided it was cheaper for them to just raise them at their facilities and then stop them from it. So, great program over the years. You kind of see, and I remember these when I was a kid. There's some of them floating out there. There's a basket with fish in it. And then I believe that's Pat down there in the corner taking some fish out of the baskets to measure, or he could be feeding one or the other. But so back to Pat in 1979, Pat Schuermann was actually hired as Spring Lake's 3rd park ranger, and he managed the park for nearly 40 years until his retirement in 2018. So in the 90s, not a lot as far as infrastructure and buildings, but they decided we needed to expand the campground. So shortly before that, Mr. Hobart retired back in 1985, and the county hired Dan Towers, which is a local native of Green County, as their director. And I know everybody knows Dan. Dan's the reason I'm here right now, so he's been a mentor of mine for many years. But so at that time, he was again kind of trying to get with the times in the 90s, trying to answer the demand that the citizens were having for new updated facilities and additional camping. So they had planned originally to expand the campground, and it was only going to be 16 sites, which was just kind of along the lakeside down there. And when they got back in there, they realized, you know what, I think we can do a little bit more with this, and we can, increase our capacity. So Jerry Spalding was the road crew foreman at the time, and the boys went to town. They increased the size, so it went from 16 sites, they created 81 sites. Way more than doubling what we currently had at the time. So this, of course, increased demand in camper. You have campers, you have increased demand in facilities. So another really cool thing that was happening back in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, still continues today, was the annual youth fishing derby at Spring Lake. So typically this last year, we had a couple-year break because of COVID, but we brought it back this year, and we again had around 100 kids, which is pretty standard for the fishing derby, which is fantastic. There's nationalist programs across the state that, they do everything they can to try to bring these people in, and they may get, 15, 20 participants. So when we have 100 people show up at Spring Lake, it's awesome, love it. So the fishing derby is actually funded almost entirely by donations. The Conservation Board really doesn't put in a lot other than time and staff, So a lot of those donations are gathered every year from local businesses. A few bigger businesses, Walmart does some donations, Shields and Bass Pro have done some in the past as well. But they wanted to make sure that every kid that was there went home with something. So we continued that this year. Every kid, so I think we had right around 100 kids sign up, and every kid went home with a free fishing pole. So that was awesome. Fishing derby, again, traditionally, is always taking place sometime during Bell Tower Festival weekend, usually on the Sunday after. Used to be Sunday afternoon, we moved it to morning. Things are a little cooler in the morning, the fish are biting a little better. This year we had great fishing, we had a lot of fish caught by kids. So yeah, back to the updating of the facilities. So in 2001, the Conservation Board, again, after demand, the increased camping size, installed its first shower facility at Spring Lake Park, and another one in 2008 on the east side. So after they did this, Spring Lake was still running on a well at that time. So you can imagine a well trying to accommodate 2 shower houses, hydrants, the ranger's house, and all that. It just wasn't conducive to what we had out there. So in 2002, starting in 2002, I believe it was finished in 2003, the board decided to abandon the original well and bring Zebra water in. Best decision they ever made. That just kind of opened the doors to be able to have more facilities that require these things. So during this time, as they added the shower houses, they had to have somewhere to put the waste. They also had a pump station, not a pump station, but a dump station as well for the campers. A lot of that prior to having the wastewater system was all pumped out via truck. They pumped it from Spring Lake and they hauled it to Jefferson where they disposed of it. So right about the same time or shortly after they built the shower houses, they decided that they needed to put in a wastewater system out there. So they constructed a lagoon and a pump system that goes from the lakeside shower house back to the lagoon. And again, that goes from our dump station back to the lagoon as well. So no longer having to pump things out and move things around, it's all done underground now. So got a couple pictures of that process. So here, Temple Drainage actually did the work. They put in, I believe it was an 6 or an 8-inch line from there, from the shower house to the dump station to the lagoon, and they'll construct the lagoon as well. So during this time, you can imagine, as a state-owned property, how much permitting was required to do all of these things. Well, there was a lot. And at that time, there was a lot of talks about the DNR actually turning the land over permanently to the county, not just having the county manage it. So while this was all going on, I think County Conservation Board, Board of Supervisors, and the DNR decided, you know what, let's make it easier on all of us, we'll just turn the land over to you. So that was the start of that. So in early 2003, Spring Lake Park actually became an official county property and is managed as a county property here today. Again, that gave us more freedom for future expansions and facilities within the park. Not as much permitting, we are a conservation organization, we take a lot of that stuff into account, but we don't have to jump through as many hoops to, install a fence or, put a pit toilet in. So that's definitely opened up the doors over the past 20 years to be able to get things done in Spring Lake. So back in 2010, or that decade, which wasn't all that long ago, the County Conservation Board had some change in hands, changing faces on the Conservation Board, so they were looking at some new options for recreation. A lot of people, horseshoes, I still play horseshoes today, playing basketball, stuff like that. But there were some new ideas out there that were kind of floating around some other counties and some other states were doing. So the Conservation Board, started looking into cabins. So if you remember me mentioning years and years ago, back in the 20s, they did have little cottages out here. Well, these are a little more updated than those. These all have running water, heat, cooling, and they are very popular. We average about, I think, 15 open nights during the summer from the time the cabins are open until they're closed. Next year, we are already full. I think we have one weekend where we're not. So very popular, even 10 years later after these things were first thought of. So 2012 was when they began planning construction. I believe they finished in 13 or 14 with the second cabin. So there's two cabins out there. In 2016, another sport that kind of has grown exponentially, and we know a lot about it too. They just dedicated a new Frisbee golf course down at Robin Deck Park here recently. Back in 2016, they decided to do the same in Spring Lake, installed a 9-hole Frisbee golf course there in the north end of the park. Again, very popular. Daily, we see people out there playing Frisbee golf, and actually talking about expanding that a little bit too, to add some more holes. So 2017, the concession stand I showed you here a few slides ago, this no longer looks like that. The changing rooms that I remember when I was a kid, they're actually all open now for open seating, picnic tables and things like that. And then they kind of expanded the actual concessions area, insulated it, it's cooled now. They've got a lot more room for inventory, other rental options too. And back, 20s to probably the early 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, canoes were the big thing. Well, now they got kayaks and paddleboards and all that stuff too. So definitely able to expand their operations and offer some more refreshments and things like that as well. So 2010 and on, still updated, always updated. In 2018, the Conservation Board began replacing the 4 vault toilets, like I mentioned earlier, that were built back in the 70s. We still have one of those by the east side shelter that we're going to replace in the next couple of years, but the other 3 look like it's very similar, or that's one of them on the left picture there. These things are, night and day as far as maintenance goes on these. They're all concrete, no requiring any painting, things like that. The fixtures and everything are all, good modern fixtures that we don't have to update, just a lot of, a little bit of maintenance yearly, and that's about all we have to do to them. So. Back in 2019, generous donation by Jerry Kelly, local farmer in the area. The lakeside shelter was renovated, which included an addition of a covered shelter out of the west side of it, which just added more capacity to the shelter. Since we've done that, we've seen reservations probably double. Since we've done that, put the new siding, pretty things up a little bit. We're actually talking about right now, insulating, heating, and cooling it so people can use it year-round. Right now, it's still got a fireplace. It's kind of hard too because we want to stick with the nostalgia. That thing's been there a long time. A lot of people have memories sitting there in the fireplace. So we're not sure 100% what we're going to do with it yet, but we're kind of floating that idea around. Also, an informational kiosk and self-registration stand was constructed right there at the entrance to the west campground. So beforehand, you remember the old ticket booth, which is now our office. Prior to it being our office, it was the old registration booth. So when the Conservation Board managed it, I think Dan Sayre told me right up until about 1985, they were taking all reservations or all your camping registrations by hand. They'd stop at the little booth, fill out the registration, and then the staff would go out and hang up their tags and things like that. Well, shortly after that, I'm not sure where exactly it came from, but we started getting self-registration tags at various campgrounds across the country. And that's primarily what we still use today. We still use the self-registration. Some folks are going online. We do have some of our sites online as well, which I'll get into here in a few minutes. So 2019 to the present, where we're at now. So some new faces and new ideas. So 2019, longtime park ranger Pat Super retires, and the Conservation Board hired Joe Allen, who's from Cedar Rapids originally, and he's our first ILEA, which is Iowa Law Enforcement Academy, certified park ranger with the Conservation Board. So prior to that, and this goes back probably 20, 25 years, there was kind of an abbreviated course that Pat had taken, I believe Dan Sayre, Dan Towers had all taken. Fortunately, they don't offer that anymore. So if we have, a certified park ranger, they have to go through the academy, just like any other law enforcement officer would. So it's great to have Joe that has that experience. I think people feel a little safer knowing somebody has, law enforcement background there, in case an issue does come up. Joe's not just at Spring Lake either. He patrols all of our parks within the county. So that's a little bit of a change from when Pat was there as well. So also in 2019, getting with the times, the reservation system using www.mycountyparks.com launches here in Greene County and started offering cabin reservations, shelter reservations, and even campground reservations. So this system evolves every year. Right now, I think we've got 22 sites, campsites, both of our cabins. We've got all but 2 of our shelters in the county listed on here. And we still will make, manual reservations if needed, but most of everything that we do is online now. So it's made, for a lot of folks, it's made it a lot easier. Some folks still a little bit of a challenge, but we're always available too. If you have questions, we help get things paid for, setting up accounts, we're always available to help with that. So in 2021, after 36 years, our director, Dan Towers, retired, and they hired me. My name's Dan again. Hi. Shortly after I was hired, Dan informed me that they were kicking me out of my office in the courthouse now. They didn't really kick me out. The gals in the recorder's office wanted to expand. They were doing all the passport pictures and things like that. So Dan's office was right there off the end. And that was kind of when Dan kind of said, hey, you know what, maybe we need to be in one of our parks. We need to be more accessible to the public if people have questions, So we started looking around, floated the idea of the depot, a couple other buildings in the county, and we started looking at the office, our current office in Spring Lake, and it was in pretty rough shape, but we got to work and got things updated and new drywall installation, pretty much ripped it down to the bare bones and started over, and that's what we ended up with. So that's our county conservation offices now. Like I said, for many years it was in the courthouse. We found that this is probably a good idea. I'm out there, 8 to 4:30. Most days I'm around the park. Some, obviously not in the office during that time all the time. But when I am, you'd be surprised at how many people stop in, ask questions, want to see our kind of little mini nature center we have going on there. So it's been really neat, been awesome being out there. So moving on. So again, we looked at Spring Lake then, this is Spring Lake now. In 2021, shortly after I was hired and Dan was retiring, we worked together for a couple weeks. We put in a new lane at the current dump station, doubling the capacity there, which has helped tremendously. If you guys are familiar with camping out there, sometimes people would wait in lines for 2-3 hours on a Sunday just to dump and get out. So now we've knocked that down quite a bit. So that was a good move. That was something I know they planned for a long time. That was something I know Dan wanted to get done before he retired. So we got that done. You all probably remember the great show of 2020. I was in Boone County at the time. Not a time I like to remember because we've pretty much been cutting trees ever since. Between that, we had a tornado outbreak last December 15th, and emerald ash borer, one of our invasive insects, and had another recent storm in July where we lost 20 or so cottonwoods in maintained areas. We've been busy cutting trees. We'd like to do some other things, but we've been busy cutting trees. But got most of our parks looking good. Right now, we're in the process of planting trees. Back in September, we got an IODNR community forestry grant that we wrote to replace 36 trees along the lakeside on the west side. Those were primarily ash that have all died or are dying in the process of dying, and river birch. So now we've got 9 different species, so we have a little bit more diversity along the lakeside in case one of these insects comes back.
What are you replacing it with?
Right now we got swamp white oak, so everybody's familiar with Spring Lake. Water table was really high, so we had to plant trees that like wet feet. We got swamp white oak, sycamore, some one plane tree, which is similar to a sycamore. What else did we get? Sugar maple, silver maple for the wetter areas. Some more river birch. We try to like to stick with native species, but I did go with, got a few tulip trees. Seem to grow really well in Iowa. Very pretty, not invasive, which is great. We don't like those. So yeah, I think we had 9 species in total, but yep, so we're really excited about that. It's been, looking at some of the ash trees that are out there now, it's probably been 30, 40 years since new trees were planted, in that amount at Spring Lake. So we're going to continue that. We're hoping for some more grant funding for trees as we move forward to replace a lot more, because we've had a lot of trees lost over the last 3 years. So not to mention, decades. So yeah, planting is currently taking place right there in the middle. That's me, Joe, and one of our seasonals, and another piece of equipment that we bought this last spring that's been a game changer. This was from the December 15th storm. You can kind of see Joe standing right there. Well, that's the root ball that goes clear up to here. So it's about a 12 to 15 foot root ball. We had 30 or so of those that we had to clean up, and had a lot of help from the road crew, which was great, and our staff and some volunteers as well. So yes.
I don't remember the exact date. I think it was in the 1980s.
Okay.
First irrational I ever experienced.
It was on my birthday. I remember. I think it was '89.
Almost leveled everything from the lake north.
And that, I think Dan Sayre said they lost, he said 68 cottonwoods.
It was a lot of.
We lost, I think, 36 in the December storm. So yeah, it was about.
The reason I remember it is because my husband's Buzzbolt family had always reserved the lakeside shelter house.
Oh,
And that storm happened about 3 days before that, and we had to scramble to find a place.
oh, I bet. Yeah, I would have been 9. That was my 9th birthday. I remember when it happened. And yeah, that was a heck of a storm too. And I think everybody forgot about derechos for a very long time until 2020. And now it seems like we get about one a year across the nation.
In
So.
Jefferson, there was a giant maple tree on Frank Price corner.
Okay.
That fell across East Park Street.
Oh, well, I remember it was a mess.
Then we had, 3 in 2 years?
Yeah, but that's what I mean. We get about one every year, somewhere across the U.S. You're starting to hear about it more. So, not one of those things we like to hear about. So,
I praise you guys for all you've done to clean it up.
well, thank you. Like I said, we've had, we've got 3 full-time staff, and we get a lot of help from the road crew. So, we're, we try to do the best we can, get things cleaned up the quickest as we can, so it makes it safe for everybody to come out and recreate. So yeah, now we're kind of, what are we doing for the future? So this past spring, we got a Grow Green County grant for $72,000 over the next 2 years to replace signage at all of our parks across the county, trails and wildlife areas as well. One of the big projects we're going to be working on this fall into next spring is the new monument at Spring Lake. We're working with Shy Battery on the engineering and the design for this. We told them, we thought it was really important. We don't, not really to mimic what's there now, but to use a lot of the same materials and kind of keep with the same style. So one of their designers came up with this and presented it to our board. We love it. We thought it was, they really took into account the old limestone that was used on the old monument, the wooden beams and things as well. And then we have a little addition, showing that we're County Conservation Board. There's kind of a lot of confusion out there as far as the difference between the DNR and County Conservation. So we're trying to, this goes statewide too. There's a lot of people that are, counties that are trying to differentiate between the 2 areas to kind of alleviate some of that confusion. So that was our idea, was, to show people these are a Green County asset, number 1. Also make them chrome reflective too, so emergency vehicles, people that are coming in at night can find these places. So we're really excited about that. So yeah, like I said, this spring we're gonna probably get the monument done at Spring Lake, and then over the following year, once we get that next disbursement of money, we'll work on replacing all the metal signs in all the other parks. So we're also working on a new garage for the park ranger. His old garage was the first shop at Spring Lake, so it's seen its better days. It needs to probably come down. So we've got the pad poured. We're probably gonna start framing that here in the next couple of weeks. We do a lot of our work in-house. It's great, you know, I grew up with a construction background, so it's good to be able to have that and utilize that in the parks. So you don't have to hire that stuff out. That's really a killer on our budget. So as much as we can, we get done in-house. So we're always busy. So, you know, again, we're always looking for new ideas. The pedestrian bridge out there right now, we're actually looking at making that more handicap accessible, so wheelchairs and things can get over that. We've had some requests for that. Widen it a little bit, maybe make some fishing piers. The lake itself, we are on the list of impaired waters in the state of Iowa, so that's kind of the first step towards lake restoration. We're looking at visiting with the board of supervisors to try to get them on board. You know, that's one of the biggest things the state looks at for funding is, do you have local support? And as long as you have local support, the DNR is willing to work with you and help fund the rest of it, fill in the gaps. So between that, grant funding, I'm hoping, you know, during my tenure here, we'll have a full-on lake restoration in Spring Lake, and that'll improve fishing, improve access, create fishing piers, things like that. So really excited about that.
You know, we have all the picnic tables up, lined up there on from the pedestrian bridge to the north. It seemed like the access to the water, and I suppose it's an ecology thing, when you've got so many rushes and stuff, you can't even get to the, and I noticed the other day there's a lot of the trees that have fallen down that you cut down in the middle there. How did that tree ever get into that middle of it? I can't figure that one out.
That's fish habitat, yeah. Ecology, so back when Joe took over, or as park ranger there, again, we've got background, we both got forestry background, which is natural resource ecology management from Iowa State. So, of course, we were taught, we love the boat areas, but we want to keep some of these areas for the wildlife and the pollinators and things. So back, it would have been in 2017, there was a big push for pollinators to increase plant communities for pollinators, monarch butterflies, honeybees, bumblebees, rusty patch bumblebees, which are endangered in the state of Iowa. So we've been trying to kind of increase those natural areas while still trying to, you kind of notice we're trying to kind of cut some areas back in there where people can go and do the fishing. The trees as well, like I said, those were just kind of we've got some pallet structures that we put out for fish habitat, but we know the quality of the cropping can swarm those things too. So that's where we kind of decided to put them there since it's not out, like all the boat traffic, it's just kind of on that one finger. Yep, as long as we can let it leave it there, yeah. Like I said, springtime, when after ice out and right before the ice goes on in Spring Lake, the crappie fishing is hot, and they love those little areas, so, yep. And we've got some pallet structures that we built too that we're going to put out for some fish habitat. Not a lot of deep spots in the lake anymore, so got to kind of find some strategic locations to put those. But like I said, during my tenure here, I'd like to see a full-on lake restoration. I'm going to do everything I can to get that because it badly needs it. So
I belong to the then group, not the now and then, I'm the then group. And when I was a kid, we lived right next door in our fences joined with Spring Lake. And we walked to school, past Spring Lake to our country school in the corner. But my brother and I would explore. So my mother thought we were just playing in the pasture, but we would cross the fence into Spring Lake and explore. So one day we went over where the bandstand was, where the orchestras played, and there was a lunch counter or a lunch room space on that side. We get over there, and McBurney, that owned the place with his group at that time, they were talking about some geek on Friday or Saturday night or something had gone to where you rented the boats. There was a place where you could rent a boat and go fishing. They had taken every boat and taken us all the way around the lake. Every boat was put someplace.
oh no.
And they were discussing it. Well, my brother and I, we said we'd get a boat and we would bring them back. So I was about 8 at the time, he was 6.5 or 7 or whatever. And we rowed out and we would pull the boat back. And then sometimes we were lucky we could bring 2 back. And we got back and we went over there to where the lunch counter was. And McBurney gave us each a candy bar.
Oh.
Well, I didn't have to share that candy bar with my brother, so we liked that.
Yeah.
One time we wanted half of it. I said, no, you're not. God, that's my nickel. Do you know that that nickel was minted in 1866? Because I took it to a real financial person who told me, gave me the paper of a picture of the coin that I brought with me today. I'll bring it out at the front and you can see it. But on the back side of it, it was round with stars all the way around it, and in the middle was a 5. And on the other side, there's more, but it's worn. And I think it probably was dropped by some of the workers that were getting the sand and the rail, working the tracks up there, or maybe somebody that was there for a ball game. I don't know which, but that coin is old. It was minted in 1866. And it's my keepsake.
Absolutely.
But I have watched things improve. We used to park when we bought a trailer. In our married life, we had a trailer. This trailer even had air conditioning in it. And we could park parallel to the lake. So we parked on the west side, headed north and south with our trailer. And we could sit outside and watch them. Now they're all parked like that. You can't, if you get out, you're almost in the inside the trailer. And that's okay. Progress changes, but I have memories of easier times.
Yep.
And I would lay in there and listen to the band play sometimes on those Saturday nights when the bands were coming through. In order to get in, it cost everybody 10 cents. But on those nights when Lawrencewell played there, they raised the ante because these people would come and sit in their cars and listen to that music. And so they raised the ante at the gate where you had to pay more to sit there and park. I go back a long ways with lots of happy memories, and I still have those memories and enjoy, but I want to keep my Spring Lake.
Well, Marilyn, you were a big help in my presentation. I was able to kind of refer back to what Marilyn had written and then kind of refer back to newspaper clippings, board minutes, first came to count. So thank you for this.
But I appreciate Spring Lake very, very much.
Thank you. We do too. We love it. Like I said, being a county, native, it's awesome to be able to manage that area. One behind.
I would like to know the spring system. Is that whole area lower? Is that why there's springs? And they don't seem to be working now because the lake is low. And the second thing, well, go ahead with that first.
The way I understand it with the springs, with Spring Lake, the topography sitting so low, that's groundwater, from the spring. So, over the years, our groundwater systems have depleted, which is why we don't see it as full as we do, all times of the year, like they may have back.
Did it used to run year round?
I asked Dan Towers about that as far as are the springs still active, and he said not to anybody's knowledge that they're not, and I don't know that anybody knows when they were no longer active. I did read that there's a first-hand account, and they were talking about fishing out there, and it would have been in the 20s. And they were talking about fishing for pickerel, which I would assume northern pike would be, because there were northern pike in Spring Lake at one time. That they talked about open water during the winter from the spring. So that would have been the 20s, but I cannot find anything beyond that as far as if they're still active. I know they're not still active as far as when they...
Is there a drainage that comes into that lake then?
It's tile fed, yep. Spring Lake right now is groundwater and tile fed. So.
And what's the deepest point?
Right now about 7 feet. Not very deep. Actually early this spring, right before we started getting rain, you were able to walk from the south end all the way out to the island without getting your feet wet.
And how deep was it at its deepest?
I don't know. That's another, I would guess, back then. So I think back then too, they weren't, they didn't have the technology, so they were using the big drag lines and things. So I think when I look back, because you can kind of look back at the topography and things on IOD and our websites, I think all the deeper are probably 20, 25 feet. I don't think it really got much deeper than that. So, and there, again, I may be wrong. I don't know. Like I said, it'd be neat to find somebody that was actually part of that excavation process. That would have been quite a long time ago. So.
There were train tracks run clear up on the east side of the skating rink area where they loaded with sand and things.
Mhm.
Every now and then, a tide will break loose and come and float away. But one day, my husband and I, one year, we were walking on those tides, and that's how low it was. Then after some rain, spring rains and
Yep.
things came, the water came up. There's a gate at the south end that will let water out if it starts getting too much.
Mhm.
You can regulate that.
I think it was Joe's first year, 2018, I believe, or 2019. They had a lot of rains that year, and they actually overtopped that and flooded out the Gulf Coast. So we now, they got a fish habitat grant. I think it would have been back in 2012 to replace that little structure. So now we have boards that we can add to it and take away from it if we want to raise and lower the lake level. But we got to be careful with the golf course. We don't want to flood it.
Well, on the south gate, the south end, when you walk way out there, you have a bench that goes way out and sit out there.
Yep.
And that ridge, if it was a pit, gravel pit, why is that, on that island and that ridge, with the low level, like you say, you can walk out there? How come it's such a high point where people that are doing these canoes in the summer, these kids, they
Hit that.
wouldn't know that that ridge is even there. And I wondered why is it so high that water?
Like I said, I think the way when they were excavating it was using those big drag lines, and I think the way they had, because if you look at Spring Lake, the way that it's laid out, it's almost like two separate lakes with that middle part and the two parts in there. And again, I don't
How
know.
many people get hung up on that?
We get hung up on it every year when we're putting the ropes on.
Boats and that, because now it's pretty visible, but just a little bit of water over it sometimes, not much.
So right out just on the north side of the boat ramp, there's another one of those that goes east and west out to that island. And that's one that we have to go out, it gets deeper as you go out, but for about 30, 40 yards, it's enough where we get on our motorboat course and stuff. So, yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing that changed a lot, I think, is when they put hard surface down from gravel. I don't know, was that early 90s or?
So Joe said they did, I don't know exactly when they did the main part of the lake. I think it was prior to the 90s, because I remember it being concrete or asphalt then. But back in 2008 or 2017, they put in where the new campground is on the east side. They asphalted that whole road, or they did the P and asphalt is what they did, or what they called it. And from there, so from that point to the tent camping area on the east side, that's all fairly new. Yeah, I'd have to ask Dan exactly when that was the whole part
Well, it was all
of the
gravel in the 70s.
So, okay.
Yeah. And then are you still using zinnia?
Yes, still using Xenia. Yep. Still using Xenia. Like I said, the biggest problem I think that they had when they added the shower houses, the flow rates. The flow rates weren't enough with the original wells. Which is great. Like I said, it's we never have any issues. Never had any. The water's pretty good. We go through. We do a little de-lining in the spring, but other than that, it goes pretty good.
Back to the gate, the little entry building there at the gate, a family lived there, and their kids went to our country school. Their name was Garlish.
Okay.
And they had 2 kids, the parents and 2 kids lived in that whole thing through the winter. And I don't really realize, as young as I was going there, what that must have been.
Right.
But as I got older, I thought, wow, how did they do that? And it was, the Spring Lake has walked through a lot of different things, reasons. They were staying there, they were gate people, and you had to stop there if you were going in.
Yep.
And it was a different world, like it was the then part.
Yeah, and it is. It's really neat to see how it's changed throughout the years from from a gravel pit to a resort to a state park, now a county park. It just keeps evolving. So.
But I treasure my memories.
I do too, and I'd like to get some more. We need to meet up sometime because I'd love to get some more stuff written down. I enjoy history myself. I think it's important that people in my generation continue on with the history of these places because there's not a lot of people in my age group that are really interested in this. So
Well, they're
I'm gonna
back
try.
to where the community kitchen was there. You probably would, some of you would remember it. You could go over there and use those things and cook there and get your meals. But behind that a ways, there was this little stage-like thing where we had a group over. And I was an acrobatic dancer, and Harriet Ryan gave lessons, and on Sunday afternoons, quite often, there would be a 2 o'clock program, free for anybody that came in. And I have a picture of Nellie Lynch. If you remember her, she was Tom Lynch's aunt, and she played the piano for a lot of all of our acts and things. And I have pictures with me too here today about this little place where all of us are lined up and danced, and it was a growing concern.
Yeah.
The people came out for the entertainment and the fun and picnics and all of that stuff. And it was just great, a great background.
This is probably way out of the box, but who owns the land south? Is there a chance that where that place is, where you could put boards and adjust the height of the lake, take that out and I'm always wondering, why can't this be a bigger lake?
Bigger lake.
Is there a way you could enlarge that?
So I'm trying to think of how many, I guess acres would be or feet between that and the south road there. I mean, it's a possibility. It's a definite possibility. Funding, that's the big thing that we struggle with is, being able to fund something like that. But again, with the history of Spring Lake, coming here, again, being from Greene County, obviously I have a passion in conservation, parks, recreation. Left Greene County, worked in a few other counties. It's so great to be back in Greene County and see the overwhelming support we have for areas like Spring Lake, Squirrel Hollow. That's one of the big ones too that hasn't been worked on in many years that we're gonna start working on. Second oldest state park in the state, or second oldest county park in the state. So yeah, but once there's a lot of grants out there to be able to do these types of things. There's funding from the state. The community just has to fill in the gaps. We just have to show people, hey, we want Spring Lake to be like it was in the 20s. We want it to thrive. We want to bring in people from other counties, which we do. That's kind of another interesting fact is going clear back to the 50s when the Conservation Board started managing it, or I guess, sorry, not 50s, 60s, late 60s, early 70s. Sorry. I can't remember where I was going with this. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But, gosh, where was I?
Other counties.
Oh, yes, sorry. So from the 50s, or from the 60s when the Conservation Board first took over until today, we still average on about 80% of our visitors to the park are from out of county. About 20% are in county. So that's kind of another neat stat that a lot of people don't understand. It's been about that way. At least from the 50s, 60s on, it's been about that way.
I know people in Fort Dodge who love to come down and camp.
Yep.
Yeah, this lake is so little. There's Russian Creek up there, goes there, but they come here.
I would have to say, as far as family-friendly lakes, I would have to say Spring Lake is probably one of the most family-friendly in the state, just because it's topography. I managed Don Williams Recreation Area for 5 years when I was in Boone County. Great Lake, there's just no access. We had a couple, little jetties and, a couple little areas, but there's just no access. We had a lot of people from Boone County that came to Spring Lake because, hey, we can kick our canoes off in the water right off our campsite and we're going, So we want to try to maintain that too, being that family friendly, especially, like I said, the lake's not too deep either. The swimming area is pretty safe. We have had accidents out there over the years, but it's in the environment too. It always seems in Spring Lake, and this goes back to when I was camping there as a kid, everybody looks out for each other, and even this day and age where we don't see a lot of that anymore, it still happens at Spring Lake. We still get our campground hosts tell us weekly, if there's a kid that not necessarily missing or, runs off and is playing with another kid, there's a family, oh yeah, he's over here, so we still have that camaraderie at Spring Lake, which is awesome.
One thing about it, there's a lot of, in the back, when the railroad came up, a lot of the rails and all that stuff were dumped at the back of the lake. And if you want to see some memories there's a few of them.
There's still some back there.
Yes,
there is. And there's actually a section of track that, if it gets low enough, will make a little bit of a sort of surface out of the water. So there is still a little bit of that.
But it's got a lot of fun things going on there, and people have been coming there for years, and hope they still continue to do so.
Absolutely.
We're not Lake Okoboji, we're not Spirit Lake, we're just Spring Lake.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thanks everybody for coming. Sitting here listening to me talk for the last
I
hour.
want to do this again in a couple of years.
I'd love to.
So keep your memories.
I'd love to. I'd love to. I really want to, like I said, I love the industry.
Well, thank you.